An apple a day keeps the doctor away. We've been saying it since the 1860s, and there's certainly something to be said for healthy eating. Apples, aside from being a delicious snack, are full of vitamins and health benefits. Studies have shown that adding some fresh apples to your diet can help you reduce your levels of bad cholesterol, and there's evidence they might even help reduce your risk of stroke. The saying is one of many that pepper our daily conversations, and while its medical origins are pretty obvious, some of the other ones, not so much. So grab yourself a fresh honeycrisp while we take a look at some of the origins behind some of these sayings and superstitions. Let's start off with a classic, snake oil. It's not an oil made for snakes, but it used to be an oil made of snakes. Nowadays, anything that we call snake oil is a fraud, something sold, claiming to cure or fix some kind of illness, disease, or malady. But it's useless at best, and at worst, might even make you sicker. But back in the 19th century, Chinese immigrants brought one of their traditional products with them. Yes, snake oil. Made from Chinese water snakes, snake oil was high in omega-3 fatty acids, something we still use today for health benefits. But since you can't get those snakes in North America, local businessmen made snake oil out of rattlesnakes. And it turns out they don't have nearly as much fatty acids, so you get a less effective product. But it wasn't until a guy named Clark Stanley came onto the scene that snake oil became synonymous with fraud. In fact, his product was so bad, in 1917, they actually investigated him, and his snake oil didn't have any snakes in it at all. So, in the end, the traditional Chinese medicine, which may have been a little odd by our standards, but had real health benefits, had its name ruined by charlatans and profiteers. Now, if you haven't used or heard the next saying much, that just means you keep good company. If you're blowing smoke up someone's arse, you're flattering them, but not with the truth. It's telling lies to bolster their ego. But in the not-so-distant past, it used to be very literal. Tobacco, the stuff in cigarettes, used to be renowned for its medicinal properties. It warmed the body and stimulated respiration. And when you had someone who was cold and not breathing, tobacco seemed like the answer. But how do you get smoke into someone who can't inhale? Well, they decided on the rectum? Smoke enemas were the cure of the day, particularly for drowning victims, and kits consisting of tobacco, fumigators, and bellows were frequently kept around canals and rivers. So if you fell into the river and were lucky enough to be pulled out, someone was probably blowing smoke up your backside in an attempt to save your life. These smoke enemas were seen as just as important as artificial respirators, someone breathing into your lungs. So it's very likely both of these methods would have been attempted, along with keeping a victim warm. Nowadays, we know that nicotine, the main agent of tobacco, is very poisonous, thanks to the work of Benjamin Brodie in the early 1800s. When they figured that out, there was a lot less smoke being blown. Well, at least when it come to medicine. Sneezes have been the source of so many myths and superstitions, we could fill a whole episode just on them. A sneeze was thought to expel spirits, but what those spirits were depends on who you asked. In the Middle Ages, in Europe, that sneeze risked losing your soul out your nose, and a speedy God bless you was in order to make sure it stayed inside. Someone may have yelled out Gesundheit to you after a sneeze, which is a German word that means health, to wish you well. Other cultures thought that sneezing was a way of expelling evil spirits, ones that wished you harm. That sounds like pollen to me. Their blessings then were to protect anyone from those freshly released spirits. Nowadays, we're all pretty sure that sneezes and spirits have no connection, but there's still plenty of schoolyard tales about what sneezes might do. You might have heard that the reason you close your eyes when you sneeze is to keep your eyeballs in. If you somehow kept them open, pop! they'd come flying right out. Thankfully, that's not true. There's plenty of muscle and nerve holding your eyeballs in your skull. They're very secure. Another myth says that your heart stops when you sneeze, only for a moment. A little less dramatic than a case of loose eyeballs, but maybe a little scarier, since heart stopping is usually something we think of as fatal. But thankfully, there's no truth to this one either. When you sneeze, the pressure change in your chest might make your heart beat slow briefly, but that's far from a stopped heart. So don't worry, sneeze away. It won't stop your heart, and your eyeballs will stay nice and safe inside your head. We've all had to work our way through something we don't want to, right? And what do? We bite the bullet. This one used to be literal, in a pretty incredible way. Let's turn back the clock again to just before the 1900s. Battlefield medicine has always had a lot of improvisation, medics working in some pretty insane conditions, and often they didn't have the best materials to work with. And you know what they didn't have back then at all? Anesthetic. Yikes. So there you are in the middle of a war with a big wound that needs to be stitched up, and the doc can't knock you out. So what's he going to tell you to do? Bite the bullet. He'll give you something to clamp your teeth down on. Sometimes it's just a stick of wood. Sometimes it might be a bullet casing. This particular phrase was first recorded in the 1891 novel The Light That Failed by English author Rudyard Kipling. Ever since then, when things get tough, we grit our teeth and we bite the bullet. This last one, it's a doozy. Hysteria, right? That used to be a genuine medical diagnosis. But before we look at that, we have to look at its predecessor. The ancient Greeks were responsible for a lot of revolutionary medical discoveries, and we certainly owe quite a bit to their physicians. But this, well, let's just say it's a little off the wall. Describing the uterus as like a living thing within another living thing, they believed that, unlike other organs, the womb could move freely throughout the body in search of fluid, causing a wide variety of symptoms. Headaches, vertigo, weakness, chest pain. It seems like just about everything could be explained by this wandering womb. And even though this belief started with the ancient Greeks, it persisted for centuries. Eventually, it faded out, but it saw a similar catch-all successor in the form of female hysteria. At first, the movement of the uterus was seen as a cause of female hysteria, but when medical science advanced enough to the point that that was ruled out, all sorts of new causes were theorized. In the 19th century, it was viewed as more of an ailment of the mind than of the body, and it seemed like every doctor had their own idea on how to treat it. Of course, to these doctors, all male of course, the end solution all seemed to point towards, these women just need to settle down with a man and bears children. It's a good thing that female hysteria isn't recognized as a medical condition anymore, since marriage certainly wouldn't cure any illness. Looking back at all the things we believed in the past, sometimes you can't help but wonder what we do today that might be viewed as a crazy cure in the future. There's no shortage of superstitions that have stuck around in some form, even if that form is just a saying. Which of our medicines might join the ranks of snake oil? Or what diagnosis will be recorded alongside the wandering womb? It's certainly something to think about.